Number 10. Cassie Chadwick. Also a Canadian. How could she? I'm upset right off the bat. Cassie went to the United States to pull this one off. If Canadians want any fame, they always go to the States. Even if it's fame for being a con artist. They're like, yeah, you gotta go south, bro. Gotta go to Hollywood, man. Just get out of here. I'm like, no. That's so stupid. She went to the States to convince everybody that she was the daughter of Andrew Carnegie. This was back in the early 1900s, so yeah, it worked. She convinced Cleveland banks to hand out $5 million in securities. Now keep in mind, that's a lot more than $5 million now, so sweet. Also, this was a time where women could not get bank loans in general, ever. So this was an impossible task times 2. Is it wrong of me to say I'm kind of impressed? Cassie passed away at age 50 in 1907 in the Columbus Penitentiary. Yeah, she got caught, but she got away with it for a bit, so, you know. Number 9. Donald Pugh. Okay, this is the craziest thing I've ever heard. Donald Pugh was suspected of arson and vandalism. So police in Ohio put a photo out of his face, of course, and they asked locals to step in and help get this man off the streets. Now this was back in 2016. Now the photo that was issued to the public was this one. But Donald wasn't a fan, right? So he sent the police a better photo of himself to use. Look, Donald, the shot, yeah, I admit it's much better. Facial hair is cleaned up a bit, the shades are pretty sick, that's a great addition. Gotta protect your eyesight as you commit arson, I guess. The police department got this pic, it's just, you know, a selfie, with the message, here is a better photo. That one is terrible. So they're like, okay, thank you. Shocker, he was caught immediately. Number 8, Logan James. Not to be confused with James Logan, that's Wolverine. No, Logan James over here had actually just breached his license conditions after being released from prison on February 6, 2015. Gwent police took to Facebook to ask locals to help out, but one user in the comments section started getting a lot of upvotes, a lot of likes. It's Logan James himself commenting on the Gwent police status. What does he have to say? Let's tune in. Haha, catch me if you can, won't see me slipping. Over 40 likes, obviously, is a pretty hot comment, right? He then added, I've been walking around near home, so they're not trying too hard to catch me, lol. Yeah, James was then caught hours later near said home, and the police thanked the public again for doing their part. Thanks, Logan. Again, we couldn't have done it without.
Number 7. Susan and James Carson. Susan and James both had some troubled backgrounds. Can't have a criminal with that one, really. They fell in love and, well, they fell in love with the same illicit substance that made the Rolling Stones, the Rolling Stones. They changed their last name to Bear and, well, it just gets worse after this point. God had written letters to them to do so. Eventually, they declared themselves witch hunters and began a spree of violent crimes. Because that's what you do. The bodies and evidence kept piling up and they kept disappearing. A manifesto was eventually found calling for the assassination of then President Ronald Reagan and late night comedy legend Johnny Carson. No relation. They were sentenced to life and remained suspects in a bunch of unsolved cases. Ooh, I don't like that. That's gross. Number 6. The Rosenbergs. 1950s America. What a beautiful place. Imagine, if you will, you have a suburb with green grass, white picket fences, and a starter home. Dad buries his PTSD from the war and takes out his anger on the family sometimes, even violently. Mom is a stay-at-home mom who's on so many prescriptions she's forced to lay down during the day with a vodka martini just to get her strength back from a headache. Oof. All while under the threat of atomic annihilation. Oh, America the brave, America the beautiful. Except the biggest thing every American feared back then was actually communists. Yeah, I know, right? Who would have thought? Communists coming to take over because they threatened the great American way of life. Julius and Ethel Rosenberg looked just like any other couple you'd find in the suburbs, except they were Soviet spies. Spies that aided a group that was leaking atomic secrets to the Soviets, allowing the Soviets to have a nuclear program years before the Americans suspected them of having one. Both de-lifed by the state after being found guilty. However, Ethel wasn't as guilty as previously thought and could have received a lighter sentence. Oops. Our bad. Oh, she's innocent? You know what I mean? They flip the switch. Oh, dude, I already flipped the switch, dude. Too late. Number 5. Amber Heard and Johnny Depp. Does this really need an introduction? That's all anybody's talking about right now. But Johnny Depp, one of America's greatest actors and teenage heartthrob on 21 Jump Street. Am I right, ladies? God, he was cute in that. Amber Heard, being some lady who had a breakout role as a fish lady and Aquaman. I haven't seen Aquaman, that's just what it looks like to me. And all of this in one of the messiest divorces ever publicized. Yikes. This trial is happening as I speak. Probably right now. It's happening right now. And we are slowly reaching the outcome. However, all I'll say is when two gorgeous millionaires marry each other and you mix in some illicit substances, well, are we really surprised this didn't work out? Johnny Depp we're talking about here. If I ever get rich and famous, I will never treat my loved ones like that, or any of the amazing people that follow me. I love you guys. You're the best. Thanks so much for watching all the time, guys. I love you. And checking me out on my own socials. Oh, shucks. You guys are the best. Number 4, French royalty. Imagine being so down bad with your husband that it starts a revolution and then inspires other European nations to be free from monarchical tyranny. Marie Antoinette and King Louis XVI were the last kings and queens of France. If crimes against humanity don't count, then I don't know what does. People had no rights, even less rights than truckers in Ottawa. Oh, that's the worst. It was a very interesting time in history. By the end, the Castile had been sieged, heads were on pikes, and the national razor was brought out just to show how democratic a new government can be. Next time, be sure to share food at the bread table. That's all I gotta say about that.
Number 2. The River City Ripper. We talked about Jack the Ripper numerous times on this channel. Well, there's another one. Everyone's got to have cool nicknames like they're wrestlers or DC villains. This is so cringe. Well, this serial killer is wanted in connection to 4 different incidents that occurred in Little Rock, Arkansas, 3 of which were fatal. These crimes took place between August 2020 and April 2021, and despite one of the victims thankfully surviving the attack and then being able to provide a description of the assailant, there's still little to go on in terms of being able to actually identify this horrible human being. That's why I wanted to include it, because I'm like, hey, hopefully, never know. Least I can do. The FBI was contacted shortly after said survivor was able to give a testimony to authorities, and their behavioral analysis team created this profile of this unidentified killer. Now, these crimes were all just random acts of violence as well that all completely occurred unprovoked. The case has gained a lot of attention, but still the monster remains at large. So look into it. I implore you to take a glance, especially if you live in the area. And finally, number 1, Belle Gunness. We'll end on a dark one. A real dark one, of course. Originally born in Norway, Belle Gunness moved to the United States at age 22. Gunness then married her first husband in 1884. They owned a candy store and all was going well until a fire out of nowhere just destroyed their entire business. It even took out 2 family members. It forced them to collect life insurance, but then in 1890, Gunness put out a life insurance policy on her husband and he ended up dying that same day. Ha! What are the odds? That's crazy. That's bizarre timing. Good thing she did that, huh? In 1892, Gunness married her second husband, and 8 months after their wedding, he died from a skull injury and she collected his life insurance. What? That's 2 now. What's going on? I don't know. What a coincidence. Finally, in 1908, Gunness's farm burned down, and upon investigation, 11 bodies were all found. Now, it was never officially determined whether or not Gunness was one of those souls. She may have escaped, who knows, but that still leaves around 14 victims that she still has to answer for. Kicking off our list at number 10. Vending machine killer. Okay, right off the hop, we have to know that apparently there are a lot of vending machines in Japan. Like it's something around 1 for every 23 people. So yeah, that's a lot of snacks. So in 1985 in Hiroshima, there were 12 people who passed away and 35 people who were seriously injured from being poisoned with a chemical herbicide. Now, when the string of poisonings were investigated, authorities realized that they had one thing in common, and that was the fact that they all had the same drink shortly before falling ill. So around the time of this entire ordeal, there was a company that had launched a marketing campaign where they gave a free drink with every purchase made from, you guessed it, a vending machine. One of the many vending machines in Japan. So when people didn't want their free drink, they would just leave it on top of the vending machine for the next person who came along, which is super nice and thoughtful instead of throwing it in the garbage. But on the other hand, there's some people who are not nice or thoughtful and rather horrible. And it turns out someone was taking these drinks and lacing them with poison and then leaving them back on top of the machines for some random stranger to come around, drink it, and then be sick or pass away. Like those numbers that I mentioned earlier. It's almost impossible for authorities to be able to track down whoever was doing this because, well, you have to narrow down where the person picked up the drink, and that's pretty impossible seeing as in 1985 there weren't nearly as many CCTV cameras as there are today, or vending machines apparently for that matter. So unfortunately, whoever was responsible for a mass poisoning of strangers is still out there somewhere. Number 9, Jacek Jaworek. Now, this is a man who is on the run because of horrible crimes that he committed in July of last year, so a little more recent than the 80s. He took the lives of 3 people who were a part of his own family. One of the family members was able to escape this horrific nightmare and was able to make it safely to the neighbor's house where they could call the authorities for help. But since these horrific crimes took place, he has gone missing and no one is sure of his whereabouts. Right now, it's speculated that he likely escaped from Poland where the crimes took place, but his exact whereabouts still remain quite the mystery. He could be literally anywhere, which is terrifying. Number 8, John Pyle. This human is a pile of garbage. This horrible human is not an undercover spy or an insane fraudster. He's just a monster who committed certain specific crimes that are unfortunately a little more common than any of us would like to know. Because of the nature of his crimes, I can't really talk about them here in this video because let's just say they're that brutal. But let's just say that he's definitely one of the worst kind of criminals out there. On June 24th, 2016, authorities searched his home after receiving 3 tips relating to these crimes. Now, the amount of and the severity of the incriminating evidence that they found during said search, he was charged with 30 different second-degree felonies alone off just that one search, which could bring a sentence of 450 years in prison. Now, he was arrested the same day, but he posted a bail bond of $90,000 as well as surrendering his passport. Now, fast forward 16 months, October 23rd, 2017, and of course this guy does not show up for his hearing. And thus we have a fugitive now on the leave. Number 7. Adrian Klein. Apparently we can't trust funeral directors now. That's fun. I guess sleep in fear. This was recent as well. This was back in 2011 when Aspen Mortuaries had a contract embalmer. First of all, that's a pretty wild job just to pick up and go around and do. Kudos if you do that. Just a contract embalmer out there. Hit that thumbs up. Nice. His name was Adrian Klein and the job was going well, I guess as well as it could be going in that specific job, until a local pawn shop delivered a tip to police saying that Klein was selling a lot of gold. A suspicious amount of gold. And considering his job, now we gotta ask a few questions, right? Was Adrian selling watches, rings, necklaces, anything like that? No, Adrian was actually selling gold teeth that he, himself. Between May and November of 2011, Klein had been selling dental gold to over 17 different pawn shops and making a pretty penny because of it. That's disgusting. Imagine the smell. Like, how do you even take that to the shop without them? Let's move on. I'm gonna throw up. Number 6, Charles Ponzi. Yeah, we've all heard the term Ponzi scheme at one point or another, but what does that even mean? Who is this man? What has he done? What has he done in history? I always get him confused with the Fonz. So growing up, I was like, this Fonz character is a little sketchy. I think. I don't know. I don't watch the show. I'm far too young. A Ponzi scheme. It's a sham of an operation. Back in 1903, Charles first moved to the United States. He was an Italian immigrant who was just looking for work. Simple as that. Now, after working job after job after job, he eventually got hired at Bank Zerosi in Montreal, Canada. When the bank went bankrupt, Ponzi was screwed. He needed to do something fast. So he dabbled into smuggling and then promptly was caught. Now, after he was released, he went into the postal system, right? This is his last hurrah. He started to buy large quantities of postal coupons from countries that already had a weak economy. He then hired a bunch of agents and trained them up good, like Wolf of Wall Street style, and the whole idea was that you would promise investors that they would receive double their investment in return within 45 days. Yeah, how lovely does that sound? Agents got 10% commission during this whole thing, so as far as the scheme, it's actually not bad. Number 5. Simon Levive. Number 5 for Mr. Levive. This is the funniest, it's not funny, but this is the craziest thing I've ever seen. I have to mention this guy. It's quite recent and there's a documentary about him on Netflix. It's called The Tinder Swindler. Perhaps you've seen this. I threw this on, not really sure what to expect, I was doing some laundry. I was hooked. I had to watch this entire thing. This guy, he's wild. He would go on the dating app, he would go on Tinder, and he would talk to women. He would get to know them a bit, favorite color, favorite album, all that stupid stuff. But then he would convince them that he was the owner of an Israeli diamond company. He would have private jets, bottles, security, you named it. He even had a big jack dude named Peter. He had a big, strong man that would just follow him around. That's how you know it's the real deal. And then he would text them out of nowhere in peril. He would say his enemies are after him, like, diamond business enemies, whatever, deep stuff like that. And he sent these women pictures. He would send them photos of Peter, like big, strong Peter, the security guard, injured, right? It didn't look great at all. Simon would also send voice notes saying that he was being attacked and how his enemies are after him. And then he would ask for like $20,000. And it worked. He did this with multiple women and it worked. It was horrible. It's the worst situation you can get yourself into. At the end of the day, he only got a 15-month sentence back in 2019. Number 4, Irina Christie. Any fans of Breaking Bad here? I slept on it for far too long. It's a good time. This next one might ring a bell or two. I don't know. Irina Christie, she was a 74-year-old calculus professor from Boston, and back in 2012, she was accused of running the same type of lab that Walter White was running. She didn't do it alone either. She had her own little Jesse Pinkman to go alongside, Her sidekick was her 29-year-old son, Grigory. Gotta keep it in the family, I guess. Reports from the Boston Globe detailed that a bomb squad had to go in their Somerville home and they removed multiple hazardous material boxes, so they were just up to the worst in their own home. They were officially charged with the distribution of conspiracy to violate law and a violation in a school zone. Yeah, that's just, you can't do anything in a school zone, especially something like this. This was all done by a 74-year-old calculus professor. Number 3. Jason Derek Brown. This piece of work has been missing ever since November 2004. That's quite a long time, but that doesn't mean authorities have given up just yet. Jason fled from Phoenix, Arizona in the year after he allegedly took the life of an armored car guard who was just outside of a movie theater. Now, after committing this already horrific crime, he then took the money and then ran, just to make things even worse. On the FBI website, where it details his crimes as well as other details about him and who to contact with any information, all that good stuff, it gives a little bio on Jason, and it says that he enjoys being the center of attention and that he clearly likes showing off his luxurious lifestyle. Yeah, it's crazy how many of these people are known for trying to flaunt their stolen lifestyle. Another thing the website reminds us is that he should be considered armed and dangerous at all times. And finally, number 1, Pedro Lopez. Pedro Lopez had a very difficult life growing up, and unfortunately this led to him living a life committing a plethora of horrible crimes throughout South America during the 1970s. Now, by the time the 80s had rolled around, he had made a mistake during one of these awful crimes, and this led to his arrest. Now, once in police custody, he spilled everything on basically his entire life and confessed at that point to an insane amount of crimes. Just confessed to everything and just unloaded. Like, we're talking confessing to 240 killings on top of the 110 that they already suspected him of doing. Police were a little skeptical of just how many crimes he said he committed, but Pedro was able to lead them to a mass grave where they recovered a total of 53 people's remains. So at that point they're like, yeah, we believe you, this is horrible. Pedro of course went to jail, but get this, he was somehow released in 1994, which is absolutely insane. That's why I had to put him on number 1 here. He was sent to some sort of mental institution for 3 years, but he was also released from there for good behavior. That's horrible.
Number 10, Bonnie and Clyde. They kind of wrote the book on couples doing bad things, where if a bad couple happens to make headlines, they could be described as a real Bonnie and Clyde, a modern Bonnie and Clyde. Bonnie Parker and Clyde Barrow were as thick as thieves, 2 peas in a pod. Merciless crooks that formed a gang in the early 1930s and wreaked havoc across middle America by robbing banks and exercising their Second Amendment a little too liberally. They were becoming a real thorn in the side for law enforcement. To make matters worse, they were becoming somewhat idolized for their crimes by some of the public. Not good. However, not even a Ford V8 could help them outrun the law for too long, as one day in 1934 it saw the young couple ambushed by agents. And by agents, I mean they turned the car and the crooks into Swiss cheese. A lot of blam blam going on, you know what I'm saying? It wasn't good. Number 9, Paul Bernardo and Carla Homolka. Despite Canada being a majestic land full of moose, mounties, and rivers of maple syrup and politeness, it's not all fine and dandy up here, folks. Nope. We have our fair share of whack jobs too. Take for example Paul Bernardo and Carla Homolka, a Canadian couple who in the early 90s took part in some heinous crimes, including the delifing of Carla's own sister. Ooh, and maybe even some sexual related crime. It was Nazi, it was bad. When it came down to the trial, Paul was going away for a very long time. Nothing was going to change that. However, Carla got the plea deal of a lifetime and got a fraction of the time compared to Paul. However, videotapes found after the case show that Carla was much more involved than previously thought and would have given her a sentence much closer to Bernardo, maybe even the same. She's currently a free woman. Gross. Number 8, Charles Manson. Okay, this one isn't so much a couple as it is like a throuple or like a grouple. Lots of people intertwined. Anyway, just a weird group of hippies. But Charles Manson was involved, romantically speaking, with his family members or cult or whatever you want to call it, rather. You can't get much more scandalous than Manson. The Manson family took refuge at Spawn Ranch, an abandoned ranch that had been used as a film lot in the past, located in sunny California, Los Angeles. The family often experimented with mind-altering substances, the same ones that made the Beatles the Beatles. Unfortunately, it wasn't all fun-loving and vegan commune happiness, brother, at Spawn Ranch, as the family became involved in numerous criminal activities, which eventually involved in the delifing of an up-and-coming movie star, Sharon Tate. You ask your mom and dad about her, they'll tell you, they'll remember. If you've ever seen Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, then you'd also understand. I try to relate things, make it more relatable for you, but ask your mom and dad, they'll tell you about the 60s.
Run. Number 7, the Beer Man. He took the lives of at least 6 people in Mumbai, India between October 2006 and January of 2007. It's not a lot of time at all. That's a lot of people people in a very short amount of time. The reason this unidentified monster is called the Beer Man, such an odd nickname, is due to one fact about each crime scene, which ended up being how they linked these crimes together in the first place. This was the presence of beer bottles that were found scattered next to each of the bodies that were found. Now, of course, it's been over a decade since the crimes were committed, so it's definitely upsetting that this person has yet to have been caught, obviously. But it's been a while, so maybe they're naturally gone. Know what I'm saying? Number 6, the Honolulu Killer. This is another one of those horrible, horrifying, unidentified serial killers who was active in and around Honolulu, Hawaii. Now, these crimes took place in 1985 and 1986, and throughout those years, it's said that whoever is responsible for these crimes took the lives of at least 5 women. These women seemingly didn't have any connection to each other as they were all from different walks of life, but because of the gruesome similarities between each of them, authorities were able to determine that they were likely committed by the same horrible person. Despite the years that it's been, the perpetrator has never been identified and could still be out there somewhere hiding from taking responsibility for their actions. Number 4, the I-70. This unidentified killer is known to have taken the lives of 6 store clerks in the Midwest back in the spring of 1992. The reason he is referred to as the I-70 killer is because most of the stores were just a few miles off Interstate 70, I-70. While most of his victims were women, there was one man, but it's believed that he may have been expecting a female employee at the time, and that's the only difference there. The killings were clearly the main objective of his crimes as well, considering the fact that each scene there was only a small amount of cash that was actually taken. Aside from these initial 6 crimes, it's thought that he also might be responsible for the deaths of 3 more store clerks in Texas back in 1993 and 1994, as well as 1 more in Indiana in 2001.
Number 3, Cleopatra and Mark Antony. Talk about scandal. Oh, if we had social media back then, this would have been everywhere. A regular Romeo and Juliet. And a little bit of Bonnie and Clyde too, actually. Cleopatra had a few Roman men wrapped around her finger. It was politics, and she was playing the long game. The Star of ex-lovers were playing with 2 empires, some of the largest at the time. However, their political string pulling and bedsheet wrestling would come to a tragic end. Cleopatra and Mark Antony would never be around to see their empires fall after some betrayal, and both of them having their lives taken away. They did some naughty things in between that though, they weren't very nice. Number 2, Mustache Man and Blonde Lady. Hey, even the biggest, baddest guys in history get lonely. Ava Braun, Mustache Man's main squeeze and wife right up until the Red Army came a-knockin'. Oh boy, they came a-knockin'. We all know what he's guilty of, and honestly, I think she's kinda guilty too. We've all seen the lost German footage of the boys making plans at the Eagle's Nest, and there she is. I'd say that doesn't look too good. I'm not a lawyer, or I am, but it doesn't look too good. It's kind of like if Adam and I were on an episode of Cops, and we got pulled over in a car together. The footage made it to the show, which means there's something in the car. It all depends on who wants to take the blame. Otherwise, you're guilty by association, or an accessory to the fact. So, yeah, I think she is kind of guilty too. Yep. If you weren't guilty, you would have gone down in the bunker with him. You know what I'm saying, Chris? You know what I'm saying? Number 1, Mussolini and partners, because he had more than one. A lot of people think Mustache Man did it on his own, but the truth is he had a lot of help from his fascismo friend in Italy, Mussolini. From organizing his fascist beatdown gangs to the brown shirts and all the war crimes in between, Mussolini had a hand in it. He showed him the way. Mussolini not only did all this while married, but kept the company of unsavory mistresses. It's a good thing he controlled the media because people wanted to say some bad things about him and his most favorite mistress, Claretta. His wife Rachel stayed with him up until the end when him and Claretta were brutally unalived by citizens fed up with his chin, he had a chin thing, and his machismo government. Multiple crimes against humanity and cheated on his wife. You know, we know you knew better. Come on, let's be honest.